Republican leaders have choked off plans to vote on approving the display of the Confederate battle flag at cemeteries that are located on federal land. That after a storm of protests from Democrats. Of course, the move coincides with that vote in the South Carolina General Assembly to remove the battle flag from outside the state capitol grounds in Columbia. But how did this become suddenly a federal issue in the first place? For some background on this, we are joined this afternoon by CQ Roll Call reporter Lauren Gardner. Lauren, it's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I think while everyone was paying attention to what was going on in Columbia, they kind of missed out on something that was going on Capitol Hill as well.
And it was happening pretty late at night, too, so most people thought that this bill was going to be put to bed, and then they continued debate, and then this amendment came out of nowhere around 8:30.
What was the genesis of it? Is this sort of the same opposition that we heard in the South Carolina vote? You know, this is a symbol of heritage. This is something that had been done for quite a while, and now all of a sudden we're trying to push it out.
Well, what happened first was earlier in the week, Democrats had approved amendments to this spending bill to kind of punch up language that the Obama administration had put forward in the wake of the shootings. So the Park Service had issued this directive saying that, you know, the flag can only be displayed in certain historical and educational circumstances, but generally we're not going to have it displayed in federal cemeteries. So Democrats proposed a couple of amendments that essentially wouldn't allow money to be spent to display it at all. And some Republicans had problems with that, and this was needed to get the vote approved.
When we talk about these displays, it's not putting a Confederate flag on a graveyard in a federal cemetery or reservation, something like that, is it, or is it more than that?
What the specific issue was that the directive that came out of the Park Service it would have allowed flags to be draped over graves on days like the Confederate Memorial Day. Instances like that, but generally speaking, it would have limited the display of them.
And in some of these cemeteries, one of them in Federal Cemetery in Beaufort, South Carolina, for example, that I'm familiar with, there are Confederate graves in that graveyard. So these were Confederates who fought on the side of the South in the Civil War. They're buried there, so that, I guess, was the reason to do that in the first place.
That perhaps was a concern.
Yeah. The net result is now that's not going to happen.
So now there is not going to be a vote to put the House on record about this at all at this point. The bill's been pulled from the floor. We don't know if it's coming back.
Was this a bit of embarrassment on the part of the GOP when all of a sudden this started to bubble up?
It doesn't really look good for them, optically speaking. You have someone like Congressman John Lewis, who is a civil rights legend, speaking out about why is this a conversation that we're having right now. Republicans are trying to approach it by saying, we're just trying to solidify what the administration did in the wake of the shootings. We just want to make that the law of the land. But the problem optically with that was that it happened after the Democrats had already seen their amendments go through that made the language stronger.
It's all about the optics as we approach election year. Lauren, thanks so much. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.